What you're seeing and hearing is the Kontakt 354, a wonderful marriage of technology and traditional design. Through a rather convoluted set of circumstances, I've befriended the American Guild of Organists branch here in Shanghai. I know, I'm as surprised as you are. So I come to visit about once a week, just to sit and play with this wonderful machine. Now, I'm not particularly skilled with it, but a chance to play a $20,000 instrument is something that should be cherished. And anytime I don't quite know where to start when I'm learning a new instrument, I look towards an old familiar friend. I think it's more than safe to say the SP404 can accompany anything.
The SP404 is only a tool for you to use how you see fit. Whether you're using it as a field recorder to capture and process the sound of the world around you, or a groove box to get you off the computer. It could just be a metronome filled with 128 gigabytes of just drum loops. It could be your entire sound library. Or maybe, just maybe, it's something more. With the right set of mind and a well-organized memory card, maybe it's the place where your inspiration is brewed, collected, and organized. Maybe.
The SP404 continues to be the most loyal accompaniment tool I own. I've yet to really breach its workflow to use as you may consider it's intended to be used, but I believe, truly, that if the device helps you to make music, then you're using it in the right way. So in this video, we'll be using the SP404 as a catalyst for creating music. There's a lot of tutorials out there on YouTube on how to use the functions of the SP404. You can always check out SPVids or NearTal. They've both done great work to cover the functions of this thing. But I wanted to make a tutorial on what to actually do with the 404, what to fill it with, and how to start a song. Now, obviously, it totally relies on your own genre and your own sound, but there's a lot of groundwork we can do to get your 404 to be a tool that you use to create. Doing the groundwork first means there's less room for second-guessing yourself when you sit down to actually use it. So we'll identify the tools we need to make a song, what components we need to assemble, and then we'll proceed to fill our SP404 with the things that inspire us. And overall covering like a range of, abstract principles, and conversely, actionable techniques. So this video has both. Lots of, out there concepts and ideas, and then also exact tutorials and processes. This lecture is intended for both SP404 power users and songwriters alike. If you're brand new to the SP404, or if you're looking to freshen up your perspective on how a sampler can be used, this video is for you. Here's the rundown. Our goal is to use the SP404 as a songwriting tool. How to use the 404 to create and capture ideas. We'll start by identifying our catalyst, asking ourselves where we typically start a song from, and then adjusting our strategy from there. We'll begin building a comprehensive sound library of drums, chords, pads, instruments, and loops and such. We'll organize them in a way that makes them easy to sort and load when using the SP404. We'll spend a lot of time going over comprehensive file management techniques strategies for organizing sounds, such as loading up whole drum kits or resampling entire VST libraries, building template projects, that sort of thing. Once we have the library built, we'll cover about 5 different ways to use the SP404 to go about making music once we've built our library. There's a bit of a caveat, though. This video will not reach the finishing process of music. Our objective here is to foster inspiration, to give ourselves the tools we need to start making music, and to catch creative moments and build compositions. But we aren't finishing our songs on the SP404. At any point in the songwriting process that you feel you're ready to move on and finalize, it's time to move to a DAW. I love the SP404, and I think it's very, very capable, but I won't lie to you and say that it's the perfect start to finish composing tool. It's not. At some point during composing and writing a song, you'll want to switch to a non-linear editing system, like a digital audio workstation, and give the song the recording capacity and detailed attention that it probably deserves. The SP404 is fantastic for initial ideas, beat making, sample chopping, that sort of thing. It's also amazing as a playback device for live performance, which I've covered before. But I am not an advocate for start to finish workflow on the 404. There's a whole process to writing a song between these 2 steps. After your idea, there's composing and arranging, tracking and polishing and animating and mixing and mastering. Lots of things the SP404 is simply not built to do in an optimized way. You can do it, of course, you can finish whole songs start to finish on the 404, but you're going to be making unnecessary compromises. So just know that we're going to be covering this part of the songwriting process and how to use the 404 to help you foster and capture your inspiration. As you can tell by the rather intimidating runtime, this will be a big one. Now, I don't want to waste your time if you don't want me to, so please have a look at the outline of the video in the description and don't hesitate to skip over stuff you're already familiar with or have no interest in. I'll try my best to slim this video down as best I can, but I put a lot of work into this and I consider it to be sort of a reference book, like a visual manual. So just know you don't have to watch the whole thing in one go. That being said, the first few chapters will be kind of abstract concepts of creativity. Then it'll be a lot of nitty-gritty sound preparation. It's a lot. And then only at this point in the video, the actual songwriting part starts. There's going to be nearly an hour of stuff to cover before we actually use the damn 404, so keep that in mind. All right, this is going to be a doozy. I'm about to sit here for 2 hours and speak. If you're ready, I'm ready. Let's do it. So, let's think for a sec about your creative process. Have you ever made a song before? Have you finished a song? If you've done more than one song, which one was your favorite? Keep that song in mind. How did you do it? What started that song? What can you do to replicate that process? And what do you need more of to do that again? Now, if you've never finished a song, no problem. That means you're a blank slate, and I truly hope something in this video speaks to you. Try a few different things and see what sticks. Everyone's creative process is different, and it's unique to them. But there's a few things that people usually get started with. Sometimes, at least in my case, it's usually a simple riff on an instrument that either you're very familiar with or you're just learning. Some people like to start with the lyrics. Maybe it's a melody you've been singing in your head all morning. I'll always wait for you. Sometimes a good drum loop is all you need to get going. So, think about it. And think about yourself. There's no right answer to this question unless you've proven it to yourself that you prefer to start one way or the other. For me, personally, it's usually a chord, usually on an off-kilter piano or key-type instrument. Whatever it is you choose, that's what you want to focus on. We want to create more of whatever thing that is that inspires you. So let's get you prepared for the songwriting process. I know you can do it. I believe in you, as long as you're prepared. Mr. Lincoln said it best. If you've got 8 hours to chop down a tree, you spend 6 of those hours just sharpening your axe. Now, interestingly, the SP404 simply doesn't function unless you prepare something for it, right? It's not a groove box. It requires you to put sounds into it. So you're probably very well aware of how much time it takes to build a song and prepare samples. You could spend hours perusing drum samples, crate digging, chopping, building synth presets, trying different sets of sound together. And by the end of whatever process you find yourself doing, you may have lost the inspiration to actually do anything with those sounds. It happens all the time. Sometimes we're in the mindset to sharpen our axe, and sometimes we just need to chop down the damn tree. Here's 2 hard truths. We need to prepare for inspiration when we're uninspired. Self-discipline cannot make you inspired. It can only make you ready for when you are inspired. We want to use the SP404 to lessen the creative friction when we sit down to create. So, rule number 1, separate your time. Preparation and creation. Sometimes you know you want to get better and you don't feel as inspired. Use that time to prepare. If you have some fire in your belly and some sort of emotion you want to convey, then use what you've prepared. The preparation process can be creative, of course, but if my time moderating the Synthesizers subreddit has taught me anything, it's that building your sounds library, crafting new tones, it's a lot of fun, but it does not get songs written. That's a different process, and it's up to you to know which one you're doing at any given time. And one's got to happen before the other. All right, enough of that. Let's start our preparation. We're going to build a large library of sounds for our SP404. That'll give us the ingredients we need to cook down the line. We'll cover each section in detail, but here's how this process is going to go down. We'll be resampling preset sounds, recording chord sets, building our drum kits and our drum libraries, copying drum kits from Ableton and Maschine. We'll be building a collection of loops, collecting lots of those catalysts that we mentioned earlier. Really, whatever you want. I'll go over strategies for each one, but ultimately it's up to you how your library is going to look. In particular, I'm going to be using Ableton and Maschine. Of course, you can use different DAWs based on what you're most familiar with, but you're going to need a comfortable place to browse and edit your sounds. So where do we start with all this? Well, have a look at how you arrange your DAW or your sample library now. Start by writing a list of sound types that you want to collect, either with pen and paper or, better yet, Excel. Think about how you like to categorize your sounds, right? There's a few different ways. Maybe you like the Arturia Native Instruments method and want to match their sound type arrangement. Personally, that's way too many categories, for me at least. Actually, I really like the Teenage Engineering EP133 sample list categories. It's vague, but it does the job, and it really makes it easier to sort your sounds. So start by looking at your sample library and put some thought into whether it works for you the way it is, or if you'd consider rearranging it and reorganizing it. Now is the time to open up your computer, have a look at where everything is stored, whether they're buried inside the program files of whatever DAW you're using, or if they're in your desktop or downloads. It's finally time to get everything together, even if that means running a Control F search for all the WAV files in your computer. Just get everything in one place and figure out how you want it organized. Whether you want to do something simple, like the aforementioned KO2 ultra minimal organizing style. If you want something more comprehensive, you could consider cloning Arturia's organizing style. I think it works great. Or if you're just a complete psychopath and you really want organized files, you could look into the NKS style of organization. Or just invent your own, based on how you think about your files. You know yourself better than anyone else, and you know your own sample library as it exists now, so just build something that you think will work. Give yourself room to expand, but don't commit to something too specific and organized if you feel you won't make use of it. Be honest with yourself and set reasonable expectations for how you plan to manage your files. But ideally, this is going to be the system you're moving forward with for a long time. So really put some thought into it. Get out a pen and paper or open up Excel and just start putting your ideas down. Organize them in a way that you think will work best for you. Most musicians I know feel limited by their lack of file management skills. We are going to be doing a lot of file sorting and batch renaming, exporting, managing. If you're not a geek like me, it's gonna suck. Really, it's not so bad. This is what I recommend. Just a quick look into my brain. Here's all the folders with all the devices I'm working with currently, plus a dozen more in the inactive folder. At the bottom, we've got a shortcut to that SP404 user folder that Roland creates on your computer when you install the sample manager thing. And we've got our reference manuals downloaded and ready to read, searchable, and we've got our libraries folder. So let's look in here. Library 1, master. That's what we're building today. Inside of that library 1 folder, we've got the following folders: work, content, backup, results. Work is where we'll actually be building our samples. All your Ableton project files and stuff you're importing, that all goes in here. Content is where we'll store our samples once we've made them, sort of like our deliverables folder. This is going straight into the SP404. 3, backup is where we'll keep our SP404 export files, because eventually you'll want to make a backup of your SD card, and you can, SP404 creates these proprietary file types that, it converts and can read more quickly. We're going to eventually want to make backups of those.
The backup folder will be filled with any of the projects that are created on the 404 in the 404's file management system. This is especially good for templates, which we will get into, just anything you make on the 404. Now, the results folder is just a spare folder for any resulting files that you've made that you want to dig into later. Maybe this is where you'll export your field recordings to, or bounce any of the files that you've made. We can use this however we want. We'll cover this a bit at the end.
So we have an outline of our files. You can, again, change this based on how your own brain works, but this is the outline we're going to run with in this video. Inside our work folder, let's turn this outline that you've written on Excel or paper or whatever, and let's turn this into an empty set of folders. 1, drum has 3 subfolders: loops, one-shots, and kits. 2, instruments will have a few subfolders, which we'll eventually sort based on our own personal preference. 3, synths will also have subfolders based on how we decide to do it. 4, chords will have subfolders eventually, and we'll make those later. 5, pads are for instrument sounds that we don't plan to play back chromatically. Again, we'll get to it later. 6, soundscapes doesn't really need subfolders. You can also just skip this if you tend not to use that sort of sound. 7, samples is where you're going to keep your samples, your chops, and whatnot. 8, catalysts will be organized however you want. And 9, utility. That's going to be for just other things we'll get to.
So right now, we just have our empty folders and the subfolders inside of them. We're going to take these empty folders, and we're going to copy them from our work folder into our content folder. Now you just have 2 identical lists of just empty folders. So we're going to do our work inside of the work folder, and we're going to export our sounds to the content folder. As we work, just presume that nothing inside of the work folder will ever end up on the SP404, and everything in the content folder will end up on your SP404. The work folder should probably be preserved in case you want to use the projects to create more samples in the future, but in theory, any excess files can just be deleted.
A few things to prepare. We need the ability to rename multiple files. It's not just important for staying organized, it's also important because that little screen on the SP404 makes it pretty hard to read file names, and we want to be able to easily find and sort the things that we've made. So I'm on Windows, and I use this amazing free software called Bulk Rename Utility. If you're on OS X, the equivalent would be Automator. Watch a tutorial on it. It is awesome what that thing can do. Bulk Rename Utility can do some wonderful things. For example, if we want to distinguish those 2 sets of empty folders from one another, we could just navigate to the work folder, use the filter to select subfolders, select all, enable the append folder name to the suffix, add a separating underscore, and click rename. Now, when you search for that folder, you know you're looking at your work folder rather than your content folder. Pretty cool, right? All right, well, it's helpful, I swear.
So this software can really do a lot. And I know it's kind of ugly to look at, and it looks pretty daunting because all the controls are just right in your face, but go part by part. We'll cover it in this video, and it's relatively easy to use. Not to mention, knowing how to do this and use the software will help you anytime you're trying to organize your files on your computer, rather than just making an SP404 sample.
There's one other thing we need to address before we start cooking up our samples. In this video, we will be generating samples that unfortunately are going to come with a whole bunch of silence at the end of them. We need a quick way to get rid of that silence, and we do not want to do that on the 404. So I will be using the free software Audacity for this. If you're not familiar with it, this part's important. You should probably watch close. Audacity is like an audio editing software, and it has a function called macros, which enable you to do multiple things in batch to a number of files. By going to Tools and then to Macro Manager, we can create a set of actions.
Making these macros is super easy. After you click Insert, it'll just show you a list of every single function you can do. So you can scroll through and just select the things you need to do to the file one at a time. An Audacity macro to remove silence basically has 5 steps. The first thing to do is select all. This will select the entire audio sample. Then we're going to use the truncate silence command. This basically detects silence under a certain threshold and will remove it from the file.
Lastly, we need to export the files, but we don't want to overwrite them in case something goes wrong. I searched the internet long and hard for this, and I found this excellent free plugin for Audacity called Legacy Output Macro Folder, which will export our sounds to a folder in that library.
That legacy macro output folder is so important because it helps us easily separate our truncated samples from our untruncated samples. And all we need to do to make this happen is just install the plugin. And that's not too hard. You take that little .ny file and you drop it into the app data roaming folder for your Audacity plugins, and then reboot Audacity and it'll appear in your list of actions. To our macro manager, we add that, add an export to wave, and now we can batch process our samples so that they get rid of all the silence. You can fine-tune the settings of the truncate silence option if you want, but I found that the default works just fine.
So I'll make this macro available for download in the description. I'll also put a link to the plugin, but making it yourself will make this process more transparent. I suggest learning how to do this yourself before we keep going. It is well worth the effort. Now, alternatively, some DAWs will do this for you. I believe Logic, Audition, and Pro Tools should have similar functions. If you use those softwares, you probably don't need me to tell you how to do it. I also don't know how to do it in those softwares, so just saying. So that's 2 skills: bulk rename files and process sounds to get rid of silence. If you can do both of those things, we're ready to start preparing our samples.
If you've got everything you need, let's start simple with our drum samples.
Okay, looking at our drums folder, we have 3 subfolders: loops, one-shots, and pre-built kits. Let's start with loops because that's just the easiest. Loops are a fantastic way to start a song, right? Setting a tempo, setting the vibe. Even if it's like a simple CR78 pattern, people have been making music to like 1-bar drum loops for decades. Now, how you sort these drum loops, well, that's totally up to you. Odds are you already have a nice loop collection, so why not just dump them all onto your SD card, right? The thing about loops is that they don't take any work to prepare. If you've already got a collection, we're good. We can drop these in our content folder. In our work folder, you can just delete the loops folder unless you plan on making like loops in your DAW or whatever. There, look, our first folder's filled. Making progress. One-shot libraries are also pretty easy to collect. Building a kit on the fly during your creative time is a little bit time-consuming, and I don't usually recommend it, but we all have a few kicks and snares and such that kind of match our personality, and, getting the right drum sound is a critical part to some people's creative processes. Not to mention, the file sizes for individual samples is pretty low, so why not just keep a small collection of drums on your SD card? One question to ask yourself is whether you want to keep your one-shot library sorted by drum type with all your kicks in one folder, or if you want to keep different vendors in the root of your drum folder so that you can browse your drum by your association with that sound. Honestly, I'm just used to the second option because that's how Maschine works, and that's how I got started. It's kind of cool to sort your drums by these curated categories, by like expansions or whatever, or being able to dive into the Wu-Tang library and just build a drum kit based off of the drums that Wu-Tang used. It's for the children, after all. Whatever you choose, just keep it consistent and keep your loops and pre-built kits out of this subfolder into their own subfolders.
You can grab your one-shot library right out of your Maschine library. For example, you just right-click one of those files in the one-shots, and it'll show you precisely where they're saved on your computer. Now, these are sorted by the drum type within the expansion that you're using. and that can get a little confusing. If you wanted to check out all the samples inside of the Soul Magic expansion, for example, you can see our drums, our instruments, our loops, our one-shots, all that. That's how the Maschine library sorts it. You could just copy and paste this all onto your 404, but just know that this sorting method isn't really optimal if you want to hear all your kicks at once. Ableton, on the other hand, does not want you to do this. They do not want you to be able to access these things easily by right-clicking a kit and checking out the sample. Right-clicking it will not show you or give you a link to where this file is saved. You can show it in the browser, but it's going to show you the Ableton browser, not your Explorer. Right-clicking these, you're not allowed to look at these files in your Explorer. Now they're there, of course, they're on your computer somewhere, but they're hidden inside of your program data folder. You have to go into the Ableton folder, click into the Live Suite, go through your resources folder, into your chord library, into the samples folder, and then the one-shot folder. Now inside of this, your drums are sorted by type, so you can copy these out, but it would have been nice to be able to access them a bit easier. And then once they've copied them, you can get rid of all the clip setting files. No matter how your one-shot library is organized, just keep them all inside of the content folder and you'll have all your one-shots ready to go. And once again, you probably don't need this folder in your work folder anymore, so unless you're, say, using a drum synth to generate your sounds. So we can just get rid of that folder. Drum kits. Are you ready for the hardest part of the video? How do we import pre-built drum kits into the SP404? So I come from Maschine, again. I like reusing sets of the same 16 drum sounds that I've used before. Similarly, you can load up drum kits from Ableton. You can build them yourself, you can save them, and they'll just always kind of work in the same arrangement. The SP404 doesn't really work on a kit style of organization like DAWs and Maschines do. Let's say I have a folder of 16 drum sounds. If I were to load this drum kit into the SP404, let's see what happens. Huh. Well, it works, but everything's sort of out of order. That'd be real nice if that worked. What we need to do is build a folder of 16 sounds that are imported in the correct order. When you load sounds into Ableton, it will just load them in from the bottom left corner. On Maschine, also from the bottom left corner. MPC, bottom left corner. Oh, look, it's a standardized process. It's almost as though everyone starts from the bottom left corner, except the SP404 and Koala. We need a numbering system so that these files appear in alphanumerical order on the 404. If you were to list samples with a number corresponding to where they loaded from the bottom left, with number 1 corresponding to the kick, number 2 to the snare, then the list of 16 files built on Ableton or Maschine will not load properly on the SP404. It'll be out of order. The kick, which is usually on pad 1, will actually be on pad 13. It just makes things harder than it needs to be. They got it right on the 606. Even Sinito and Donner got it right. All right, stop. All this means is that we need to develop a system for, renaming files so that they appear in the right order on the SD card. Strap in, because this part is just... We want to build a numerical list of 16 files for each kit, except the rows need to be collated and reversed. So your bottom row needs to be 13 through 16, top rows 1 through 4. We need to build a system that will take 16 sounds out of our DAW's drum rack and export them in this just super inconvenient numbering system. We need a way to do this very quickly to dozens or hundreds of kits rather than building each kit individually, because that would take forever. Right now, there's no automatic process for this hyper-specific task. So there is a software that does this, actually. It's called Kitmaker, which you're welcome to give it a try. I've given it a go. I find it doesn't work exactly how I expected it to, but perhaps someone out there can have more luck than I did. It's cheap, and, support the creator. He's doing something cool. So we need to build that ourselves, and we need to keep it as quick and as simple as possible. I've been messing with this for months, and I feel like I'm missing something. I feel like I'm going crazy, but this is the method I've figured out. It's kind of sucks, but it's the cleanest I've found. The quick version is this. We're going to export all of our samples from our DAW in this sort of reverse collated order.
We'll take these 16 samples and process them using Audacity to remove the silence and shrink the file size. We'll use bulk rename utility to cut all the crap out of the file names and ensure everything's in a given order, and then we'll sort it into folders. Look, it's definitely a couple hours. It is awesome having all your kits on the 404, so I think it's well worth the effort. And plus, once you build the system once and become familiar with it, it becomes really easy to do like a whole bunch of times. And the more kits you do in one sitting, the faster you go. Here we go, step-by-step guide on getting your Ableton drum rack into the 404.
Upon opening Ableton, the very first thing we should do is create a project file and save it. We'll do that inside of our work folder, drums, kits, and let's just call it construction. Be sure the file name isn't too long or else you may get an error down the line. Trust me, I learned the hard way. Now, we'll start by loading our first drum kit. Now we're using one with samples, which makes things easy. Now, if I play through, I can hear the different samples. The function we're going to be making use of is called crop. If I look at the sample and I right-click and I select crop, what it's done has created an identical file. Where is that file being created? Well, it's inside of the project folder. If I look into that new construction project, I go to Samples, Processed, there's a new folder called Crop. There, that's the file I just created. Now, if I were to do that again to the next file, return to my browser, I've now created a second file. These files were created chronologically. You can see the time, 1:26 a.m., I should go to bed. This is our chance to create the files in the order that we need them so that they'll appear correctly on the 404. We need the kick drum to be the 13th file in this list. So, by cropping every sample in order from the top left, we'll populate the crop folder with our kit in the right order. Ignoring the Ableton Live clip files, you'll see that the kick is now the 13th audio file, just where we need it. The problem is, the 404 reads files alphabetically. If we were to sort by name, well, now it's all scattered and it's out of the order we need it. This is how the SP404 would read it if we just imported it like this. But we know, if we sort by date modified, it shows the files in the order we created them. So we will have the ability to change the file names later so that they appear in order on the SP404. That's good. We'll get there. But first, let's generate all of our kits. So we obviously want to move these files out of the crop folder and into a folder named after the kit. I'll create a new folder and call it cropped kits. And I'll make a folder named after this kit. Now there's an issue. I can't move these files out of the crop folder because they're still being used in Ableton. What we have to do is go back into Ableton and create another MIDI track. We delete the first MIDI track and create the next drum kit on the fresh track. This means Ableton will allow us to move these cropped files. So if I take these cropped files and move them into our folder, now our cropped folder is empty and we can do the process again with our next kit. We simply go through and crop every sample in order. It takes like 20 seconds. And our crop folder is now filled with a second kit. We create another folder named after that kit. Back into Ableton, another new MIDI track, delete the first track, move the files, and repeat ad infinitum. Once you've done this however many times you want, you can just run a search for all the ASD files and delete them. Now, every drum kit folder inside of our cropped kits folder only has WAV files. Again, sorting by date modified shows them in the order we want them. See, kick is number 13. I'm going to copy our file path and then paste it inside of bulk rename utility so we can just navigate there right away. We're going to use bulk rename utility to clean up these file names, but first we need to sort by date. If you don't see it, it's probably hidden off screen. If I sort by modified, again, kick on number 13, it means we're in the right order. To use bulk rename utility to clean up the files, let's see what we should do first. We have the names of our sample here, and then it's followed by a bunch of numbers which indicate the date in which they were created. That's the stuff we want to get rid of for a cleaner file name. And of course, we need the numbering system. Let's start by removing the last, let's count. That seems about right. There's still some junk here we can get rid of in a little bit, but it seems like we're getting rid of about 24 characters of junk. I'll go into the numbering system and add a prefix. It's ordering everything in the right order. However, it's just a little bit too ugly, so let's add a separating underscore, and we need this to be 2 numbers. So we'll add a pad of 2. There, 01 through 16 with a kick on number 13. We are in the right order to import onto the 404. If I click rename, our files are now named the way they ought to be. You can take this a step further to clean up the file names even more if you like. If I reset, that will get rid of the functions we made. Let's change every underscore to a space. We can go to the replace underscore with space. That looks right. And let's do the same with the dash. Replace every dash with a space. Looking closer at the file names, I'm seeing the word heavy rock a lot. What I'll do is replace every heavy rock with nothing. It's important not to go too overboard with cleaning up these file names. You'll be doing them a lot. We just need to get them in the right order. And we need to see, what kind of drum it is, because we're going to be doing the same for every kit. It actually doesn't take too long. We know it's 24 characters, numbering mode prefix with a pad of 2, and a separator underscore. There we go. Not everything's named perfectly, but we already know what this kit is. This is the AG Techno kit. Most importantly, it's in the order that will be imported properly into the 404. Everything we've done so far should still be inside of this work folder. But now that they're truncated and properly named and properly ordered, we can move them finally into the content folder. Inside of our work folder, we already have lots and lots of copies and different versions of the files we've already made. We will trash them at some point, but we want to make sure everything in the content folder works first before we get rid of any of the old stuff. Now would be a great time to bring what you have in the content folder onto your SP404 and test the kits. Just make sure everything works out. Now, as for other DAWs, this latter half of the process is the same, but you still need to get your 16 samples exported. If you're using Maschine, just put one MIDI note on all of your 16 pads, just in one scene. Duplicate that kit about 24 times, or as many as you can before your computer crashes. For me, that was 24. And then load a drum kit onto each one of those 24 banks. Now we just export the single scene by sound, which will spit out all of your files in one folder. But they're very conveniently named. While everything's in one place, we run our Audacity macro now on all the files we just spit out. Then we go through our file list and just create the folders ourselves for the names of each kit. This part sucks. Then we go through and give everything a 1 through 16 numbering. And we wrap up by collating. Make sure every 13 is a 29, 14 is a 30, and so on. That way things will load up properly on the SP404, even though it'll be 17 through 32. Now you just have a bunch of kits comfortably loaded onto your 404 after far, far too much work. Alright, if you haven't turned off the video yet in sheer disgust at the amount of file management needed for this sort of library to look good, you and I could probably be friends. I know it sucks. The real question is it worth it? Honestly, yes. I've spent a few hours doing this over the past few months, and I really like having 50 or so kits just on my SP404 ready to go. Plus, once you do this, just copy them onto your phone, and you can use them in Koala as well. It's really shitty when there's not some automated process to do this for you, and if you can code, I bet you're looking at this and probably coming up with a solution right now. People have tried to make Macs devices that solve this problem for you. I've tried a few ways. This works the best for me for now, but if you know something better, for the love of God, let us know. We've now finished preparing all of our drum samples. For now, of course, we can continue to add to this as we go on, but we've reached a good point to move on. We're going to be covering the instruments and synthesizer section. These folders will be filled with single notes from a wide variety of different timbres and synthesizers and types of instruments. We'll use that single note played back chromatically using the SP404's chromatic mode.
There's a lot of limitations to using sampled instruments played back chromatically. For example, when playing a synthesizer, it has a lot to do with expression, velocity, live modulation of timbres over time, and like using pedals and sliders and wheels and knobs and stuff. Or even like aftertouch and MPE, whereas playing back an instrument on the SP404, just a lot less capacity for dynamic range, let's say. Acoustic instruments don't sound great when pitch shifted too far from the original recording. And synths, if they evolve over time, it'll quickly show artifacts and stuff, like it'll just sound worse, and they lose a lot of their nuance if you time warp them. But you know what? It doesn't matter. People have been using sounds resampled as single notes for years. Hell, even some synthesizers like the EMU emulator, they were designed around this sort of principle. And so, maybe we can't modulate a note using the synth's built-in filter, but we can make use of the 404's buses and process our instruments separately from our drum kit.
Playing resampled instruments may not be the most flexible, but you'd be surprised at how much fun and how many ideas can come out of playing synths like this.
So here's how I've been doing it.
Upon opening Ableton, we'll create a new set, again. Inside of our work folder, we'll go into our instruments or synthesizers, whatever we're working on, and create a project called Construction, or Instrument Construction. We start by building synth patches, or just load a bunch of presets. We put one note with a quick attack and sustain for about 5-10 seconds, and we repeat this for as many instruments as you can before your CPU limit cries for mercy. The file name will be named after the track, so make sure you include the name of the preset and the instrument in which you got it from, in case you're using a certain type of synthesizer. Assuming everything's named properly, we export them all as individual tracks. The release of the synth isn't particularly important because we will be using the SP404's built-in amplitude envelope, but generally, a nice long note with a slow release, it'll help. A good rule of thumb is to try and avoid time-based modulation, because the rate of that modulation will change with every note in chromatic mode, and we don't want that. Not all of our synth patches will be able to sustain themselves for 10 seconds, so there's always going to be a lot of silence. We run that through our Audacity macro, and we should have nice clean samples of all of our synthesizers. You'll end up with a big unsorted list, but everything should be named properly. So we can just sift these into folders named after the synth or sound source or however you'd like to do it. You can choose to go through and get rid of all of those prefixes, but otherwise just have a look and make sure there's no extra junk at the end of your file names. Once it's imported onto your SP404, you'll have all your synth patches loaded up with a single note ready to play in chromatic mode.
So think back to, Kontakt or check your Excel want list and see how you want to arrange the sounds in a way that makes sense to you. Now, I'm a synth geek, so I like to sort mine by the synthesizer used to make the sound. But I wouldn't really suggest that for everyone. Bass, pad, key, lead, miscellaneous is a really good, category set to go by. And then obviously the acoustic instruments go into their own subfolders based on however you want them. Now, if you're real freaky and you want 1,000 different bass sounds, you could just resample the instrument en masse.
Load up an instance of Kontakt, rename the track to the name of the preset, let it play through, hitting stop after the preview is finished, and finding all your samples in your sample folder already named, just get rid of the trash and you'd have a quick and dirty resample of every Kontakt instrument you could bear to sit through.
Now that's a lot of work. But if you're gonna do something like that...
When you scroll through your Kontakt instruments, you hear a preview of all those instruments? Those are actually sound files hidden somewhere very, very deep in your computer. They're saved as OGG files, which is obviously not something the 404 can recognize, but we can change that. A quick file search for the .previews folders will reveal pretty much every NKS-enabled folder on your computer, which contains, well, in my case, over 500,000 files. Not all of those are sounds, mind you. A lot of them are just junk, but we'll be able to get rid of those later. For now, we just take all those .preview folders and copy them to, very likely, an external hard drive. Working with these .preview folders. They're all the same name, so if we append the folder name to every one of those preview folders, we now have a bunch of folders named after the Kontakt instruments. Each folder contains the preview sounds of that Kontakt instrument. Gotta clean up the folder names first, and that's not too hard. You just get rid of any information you don't need, such as native instruments or autoria, look for the word preview, and just keep getting rid of words that you feel you're seeing too often. Go through the folder list, and anytime you see a combination of letters and names again and again and again, feel free to just get rid of them all. Make sure your folder names are nice and tidy because you are going to be looking at this on the 404. These folders now contain a mix of OGG files and not OGG files. Get rid of anything that's not an OGG. Now we need to convert the OGGs to WAV. This is a bit of a pro gamer move if you happen to have hundreds of thousands of files. I use Adobe Media Encoder for this sort of thing, and I had to do it in small batches of 5,000 files each because, my god, this took a long time. And it's a lot of time spent waiting for the files to convert and copy and whatnot, but the amount of time actually spent doing stuff to prepare these files is shockingly not that bad. It's only just a few actions, and if you schedule it, it's manageable. When everything's done converting, you essentially have doubled the amount of files you have. I think I reached 1.2 million files. You may also have your WAV files mixed in with your OGG files. I found my computer could only reasonably delete 100,000 files at a time. So in order to get rid of all the junk files and all the OGG files, I used a free software called Total File Commander, which was very helpful for getting rid of all the files I didn't need. Now every folder has just the WAV files inside, but the folder names could still use some work. For example, Ashlight has a different folder for every type of instrument. Sunk cost fallacy be damned, it is now time to sort these folders into folders named after the Kontakt instrument. Then, going folder by folder, just check through everything to make sure everything's properly named, that there's no extra junk, all the subfolders work, and if you haven't just thrown your computer out of the window yet, just make sure that everything is neat and tidy as possible. Checking into your folders, just keep refining, making sure you get rid of any subfolders you don't need, and feel free to treat the files to one more bulk rename to get rid of any .nki, any extra junk that you may find. Lo and behold, your entire Kontakt preview library is now on your SP404. It doesn't always work, because some of the preview sounds are like a chord rather than a single note, and sometimes it's even a sequence. But you know what? You now have so many files to sift through whenever you're looking to sit down and start with something.
I'm just saying you could do that. Either way, we build and sort a library that you're proud of. If you feel like you're wasting your time doing it, then maybe those instruments may not be the sort of thing that you're looking for, or do less of them. But it's good to have a bunch of different timbres sampled and see. That way, if you load it up on a pad, it's easier to use like chromatic mode and just play it back. And don't forget, we can use a MIDI controller to play a single pad, as if it's an instrument. You can just load this with hundreds of sounds and play them back as you would the original synthesizer, without all the expression.
The chromatic mode does have a 2-octave limit, but let's not ruin the fun. That's plenty to get creative with.
In addition to synths, there's a lot of acoustic instruments worth sampling. I think the tuned percussion, like marimba, celesta, xylophone, hung, and all that, these are all really great sounds to have on deck because, for whatever reason, they still tend to sound pretty good after being pitch shifted. So try those. Just know that building this list is a hell of a lot easier than building drum kits, so don't hesitate to fill your library with like a lot of different instruments and tones. And certainly don't forget to get all your favorites.
How you plan to fill this folder, the instruments and the synths folder, it's entirely up to you. Personally, I'm not very proud of how I organized my own instruments folder, but have a look at your list. Determine what kind of synthesizer sounds you like or what kind of instruments you use. You only need a single note from every instrument, so it's not particularly hard to populate this list. Whether you're going through and grabbing one note from your VSTs, or you actually go through and manage to steal your whole instrument library, however you go about it, a bunch of instruments to scroll through is very helpful and very fun. I'm sure you can think of other ways to populate this list, but for now, we've finished with the instrument and synth section. We're going to now create some chord sets.
Chord sets are one of those things I use most often when it comes to starting my new idea. What we'll do here is we'll pick a few sounds, probably keys and pianos and stuff, and we'll load 15 chords of each sound. That way, we can fill a bank with one spare slot for a resampled single note of that scale to add to the chord if we need. Clever. But what chords do we use? So if you're a guitarist or a pianist or you compose music already, then you can choose, right? Odds are you probably know more about chord theory than I do. If you've got like a Launchpad or Maschine, you can use their handy chord sets or just build them yourself. If you've got a Roland J6, browse by genre and grab a few chords that sound good. And I mean, like, use the MIDI from that device and, generate the sounds on your DAW. A lot of hardware these days have some sort of chord function. We're looking for a good variety of 15 different chords. If you don't have any hardware to help you do this, then just watch one of those Instagram reels where someone teaches you weird and interesting chords that sound interesting to you, and then just go note by note and recreate them in your DAW.
Just load that video into Ableton and follow along. Go note by note and recreate the chord. This takes a lot less time than you might think. It's a nice way to boost the quality of the original sample, and of course you can use it with any instrument you want.
Or just download some free chord packs online, Do whatever you want. Don't buy them. Don't buy chord packs. That's dumb. Just get them for free. They're out there. Don't fret too much deciding what chords to select. Just pick a mix of like major, minor, and a couple funky jazz ones. 15 different chords should be enough to get us to, spark some ideas to get us started.
I'm going to go through and populate these with different instruments. I'm back, and I went a little overboard. I just kept hearing sounds that I wanted to turn to chord sets, so I added a few more instruments, and I've also doubled the amount of chords. I figured the first 16 chords all sound nice. They're all sevenths and ninths, so they sound very pretty. But this second set of chords, they're a bit stranger. A lot of weird combination of notes, but I'm sure they'll be usable. The chords down here are a bit more strange. I've gone through and I've numbered all of them, all 32, 1 through 32, because I want them to load in the right order on the SP404. This isn't super important, but I just want that single note in the top right corner of every chord bank we make. So the samples are numbered the right way. I'm now going to reduce the BPM of the project down to 30 or something really low. I want these chords to last a long time. Every clip is 2 measures. Half of it is the note and half of it is the release. It's not looped. Again, super important it's not looped because otherwise you'll get a sample with 2 chords triggered, and I don't really know why, but that cost me a couple of days. So what I'm going to do first is save this project, and then I'm going to save it again. Chord Set 01-crop. The reason we're making another copy is because we're actually going to destroy this project, and we want to be able to go back to the MIDI at some point if we ever want to make more. Now I've got a new project. I'm going to go through, select every instrument, right-click, and select Freeze. Freeze is a function in Ableton which takes MIDI tracks, and it temporarily converts them to audio files. That way it's not running the VST and costing us our precious CPU. But we're interested in those audio files. That's exactly what we want. We have a bunch of MIDI clips full of chords, and freezing them is just the fastest way to do it. It takes about 6 or 7 minutes on my end for these particular instruments. It's generated the audio files somewhere. Let's have a look. Inside of the current project folder, the Ableton project folder, well, there's a samples folder here. That wasn't there before. If we click in, we see a processed folder and freeze. There are all of the audio files that Ableton is using for its freeze functionality. But you can see 2 problems right off the bat. First off, everything's in one folder, and we don't want that. And second, we don't see the name of the chord in this sample. We just see the word freeze and then whatever instrument it is, and the time it was created. We can do better than this, for sure. Going back into Ableton, there's just a few steps left. We're going to take every track, right-click, and flatten. When you flatten a track in Ableton, you're essentially getting rid of the MIDI data and replacing it with the frozen audio clip. Now, the audio files are still in the same place, it's using the same audio files, and we want to put the name of the clip onto the audio file. In our chord folder, I'm going to create a new folder called Chord Samples. And in this folder, I'm going to create folders for every instrument I've done so far. Now, we select all the clips in our first instrument. Right-click and crop. You see it goes through and processes all the different clips. What's happening is, it's created a new folder called crop right next to the freeze folder. Going into that crop folder, you'll see that it's generated new audio files of those frozen clips. But most importantly, they're named correctly. We see the number, we see what chord it is, and all of these chords are from the first instrument. If I were to do the second instrument now, it would start to mix the chord files together, and we don't want that. So the next step is to take the samples out of the crop folder and put them into their own folder. We can't do that until we delete this track in Ableton. Now we have the freedom to move the files out of the Ableton project folder. Now you can see why we created a duplicate Ableton project, because we're going to go through, crop all of these, and then delete them one by one. Let's do it again. with the grand piano, right click, crop, goes through all the clips, we delete that track, everything in the crop folder belongs to the grand piano, so we move that into its own folder, and we repeat the process for just the rest of the instruments. Looks like we're about finished. If we look into one of these folders, what do we see? We see the WAV files and the Ableton live clip files, which we obviously don't need. So we'll go back to our sample folder here, do a search for ASD, and we can just trash all these. We certainly don't need them. We check the folder one more time, and there we go. There's our 32 chords. File names could use some work, of course. Head over to bulk rename utility. If we check for subfolders, that'll show us all of the files inside of those folders. Every single file has the exact number of junk characters behind the name of the chord. I believe that number is 29. Yeah, 29. I got it. There's all of our chords. The number looks right. One other thing we could consider doing is appending the name of the folder at the end of the file, just in case we need to know what instrument this is if we go looking for this sample later. We're looking at it on a small screen of the SP404. We'll see the name of the chord where we need it, and if we need to go digging this out of our hard drive later, we'll know what chord we're looking at. There we go. Everything's properly named. If we pull one up in Audacity, let's see what we get. There we go. Looks good to me. Now, there's a lot of silence at the end, of course. We could run this through our Audacity macro, but for chords, I found that's not really necessary. A little bit of silence at the end is okay. Plus, we're going to be using the envelope control, so I'll probably just skip the silence macro for these.
For example, if you make a progression you like and you want to polish it up for a finished track, it won't be particularly difficult to recreate this chord sequence using MIDI in Ableton. You just figure out what chords you were using and either reload them from the MIDI pack or learn to play them on the keyboard. The MIDI monitor is your friend here.
Because we're in MIDI mode A, the MIDI data from the C bank will appear on channel 3. So if I were to play that pattern back in record mode, we can see the MIDI data being played back. Now, of course, we're not seeing the actual chord, we're just seeing the pad note being played back, but it does reflect properly in the drum rack. If I play back here, you can see pretty much the same pattern being played. Now, one option is to load in the original samples, which of course we can do, although we have to do them one row at a time because this is Ableton and they get dragged in a different order. And now if we play this MIDI data, we'd have to play with the release a little bit, but it's more or less the same thing. But more importantly, we can see what chord is being played at what time. There's our F minor 7. There's our D minor 7. And over here, we have our A7.
You could repeat this process with like a bunch of different chords if you wanted. You don't need to only do 15 chords. You could do like 50. You could do this with as many instruments as you want. It's really up to you how you want to go about filling this out and how much work you want to put into it. But as with the other instruments, don't go too crazy, right? Creative limitations will do you some good, and 15 types of chords is probably enough for just jamming and creating a little song. Lastly, everything in the key of C. Because it's the SP404 Mark II, you can easily transpose your samples when you're working.
Either transposing individual samples or an entire bank at a time. This next section covers catalysts. Now, I have a folder specifically for Catalyst, which I'll go into detail, but in this section I'm also going to be discussing all of the other things that help get a song going, whether it be the pads or sample packs or soundscapes. So as we go through this section, just adapt it to your own personal classification of sounds.
Catalysts is a bit more of an open category. It's more up to you, and it's based on what you find. It's essentially a folder for samples, but I think there's a bit more to it. Catalysts are those sounds that you collect and hope to revisit someday, or maybe hope to start a song around. You may have already found catalysts in the things we've done so far, the drum kits, the loops, and the chords, but everyone works differently. The catalyst section is good for storing samples and field recordings and things you can look into if you aren't sure where to start, but you want to explore something you've collected before. This collection is something you probably already have, especially if you like to use vinyls or collect samples. It also means you might be a little hard to categorize and stay organized because it's totally based on what you've already found, right? Honestly, that's fine. I think keeping your drums organized is way more important than this. Let's flush this section of our card out with a few things that might help you out. Saved. So if you're watching this video, it means you're on YouTube, and that means you're probably also on Instagram and TikTok and Xiaohongshu or whatever. All these apps have a save or collect function. And if you like music stuff, odds are you may have saved some music-related things. We've all seen those interesting chords or weird songs, things that inspire you. Use a real downloader or just plug your phone into your SP404. Go through and sample some of those chord demonstrations or music things.
Depending on what app you use to get these samples, you may have to convert them to WAV, and then be sure to rename them all properly, because you will be looking at them on a very tiny screen. Also consider sorting them by what kind of sample you consider them to be, whether it's a vocal sample or a synth or something like that.
It's a little bit more cathartic than you might think to take those videos that you've collected while you've just been mindlessly doom scrolling and convincing yourself, one day I should come back to this and use this chord set and do something with it. Turning it into an audio file and bringing it into your workplace is an action. And you never know what might come of that. So it almost feels like you're just kind of manifesting all those hours of scrolling, and they may finally come back to help you. Now, I don't recommend actually using those sounds in your own music. Obviously, sampling is a real legal gray area, but in the spirit of this video, maybe hearing those fancy chords cut up in a new way, then looped, maybe it'll give you the basis of your next song. You never know. Then you can always go back and document those chords that you've cut up and build a new patch out of it. Who knows? You and I probably save very different sorts of videos. So it's on you to decide what you'll inevitably do with those audio files. All I'm saying is try getting them off your phone and into your SP404. It really doesn't take that much effort. And there's just some sort of magic feeling about turning them into a tangible audio sample. Just try it, see what happens. Speaking of importing samples you've found out in the wild, I'm infamously not a crate digger, sample collector. It's really just not my thing. It's not how I make music. But I do occasionally find myself in the parts of YouTube where people will just bulk upload entire albums of niche or weird forgotten music, and I think audio files are very small. Storage is very cheap, and if I find an artist I wanted to sample and I wanted to see all their music, why not keep a couple of entire albums of their music on my SD card? I mean, it's at most a couple of gigabytes, right? And the SP404 supports up to a terabyte of storage if you're willing to pay for it. The maximum sample time for one sample is 16 minutes. So I'd download a few albums of music by track, import it to a pad, and listen through an album, or just spin the start knob, rhythm roulette, and grab a random piece and just work from there. It's not so different from sitting in front of a vinyl machine and just moving the needle, right? I mean, I'd try to avoid the YouTube compressed version of things, but if you've already got a good collection of old albums on a YouTube playlist and they're just sitting there, why not download them, drop them onto your card? All right, don't go filling up your whole card with your whole music library now, but I feel everyone I've met who's shown me their SP404 workflows, they talk about some sort of type of album that they like to sample. And sometimes it's one album that they feel they could sample every 20 seconds of. The act of sitting in front of a vinyl machine and discovering something new is probably the ideal feeling, the creative way to go about it. But if you have any sort of sample fodder folders anywhere on your computer or your phone or your social medias or whatever, just try to manifest them into something actionable. Sample them, drop them into your library. Just remove the number of steps between finding that sound and chopping it up. Pads and soundscapes. So a while back, I made this ambient SD card for the SP404A. The organization of that card was like this. Soundscapes, nature percussion one-shots, 2 sets of soundscape synth pads, 2 instruments, 2 perk kits, and some chords.
I haven't I haven't used the SP404A in a few years. It's nice to see it again.
There's a few things in this card layout that are still very applicable, even now on the SP404 Mark II. For now, let's look at these soundscapes. There are so many field recordings out there, either on freesound.org or mynoise.net or even just like YouTube. This is some people's hobby, to go out into the nature and just record a very particular place. So collect a few 10 to 16 minute long form recordings of soundscapes and drop them onto the card. If it's longer than 16 minutes, trim it down using Ableton. I don't really consider soundscapes to be catalysts, so I would definitely keep them out of the catalyst folder, but they're really fun to collect, and I'd keep them on the card regardless. Similarly, nature things like one-shots, like singing bowls and bells and a crack of thunder here and there, these are all great fit, although they don't belong in your catalyst folder. They belong somewhere else in the card.
Another key component to the Ambient 1 card were the pad sounds. Now, they're labeled as soundscapes, although that's not quite appropriate. These are pad synthesizers, software instruments that create a very vivid and complex tone, where one note is sufficiently evolving and complex. To make these pad sounds, we will resample a single note or a very basic melody and play them back without the intention of playing them chromatically.
Really complex, evolving ambient synths that you can make using stuff like lures or fables, ashlight, straylight, farlight. They're so dense with sound and texture that, even just playing one note resampled can be enough to provide a background of sound to just kind of sit with and compose around. You can just resample a single note of each preset and see where that takes you. I treat these evolving pads differently from the synths in our instrument folder because, quite frankly, they don't work as well pitch shifted. A single note is enough to get a song moving. Head into whatever crazy VST or whatever you've got for generating cinematic, deep, and complex soundscapes. Sample a bunch of single notes. Just make sure they're named properly, drop them into a folder based on where you got them. Depending on the genre you make, it may not be the best to put time into these heavier evolving pads, but odds are, if you make music on a computer, you've got a collection of virtual instruments that you like. Go find the crazier ones, like the noisemakers and the not so melodic ones. Grab a couple of its presets, sampled in C, drop them on the card. For the Catalyst folder, one VST I really enjoy perusing is Sequus. It's an orchestral sequencer, and sometimes having like a nice little sequence going is just a nice way to get a unique kind of rhythm feeling for your song, so that's a good place to start. I'm also a huge fan of mallet flux. Getting a couple of modest mallet arpeggios on standby have helped me create a lot. ARP loops are just a little bit too repetitive to process through a whole track, but they're really nice for building a foundational sound around. Ultimately, this folder can be filled with whatever you want, and populating this folder is more about curiosity and exploration rather than strategy and organization. So whenever you have the feeling to collect and manifest, gather these sort of sounds that interest you, put them in the Catalyst folder, and know that you're now more likely to revisit them than ever when you're looking for something to start with on the SP404. Okay, one last folder of sounds to collect, and this one isn't creative at all. Actually, it's more like utilitarian. These are the sounds that you ought to keep on your card that will help you when using the SP404. For example, a lot of people like to have a metronome with their own sounds on it.
Or, as we'll cover later, to send the metronome sounds to only the headphones via pad mute function as opposed to sending it to the master mix as well.
So, keep a couple of clicky percussion sounds that you can use as a metronome as opposed to the default sound. We'll be definitely doing this later in the video, so, grab a couple metronome sounds, even if it's only up and down. Sometimes I need to test for stereo sound. If I'm plugged into an amp I'm not familiar with or something, and I need to clearly hear something in the left channel and the right channel, I keep this weird little file with one tone in my left ear and one tone in my right. And that way I can make sure a speaker is, wired properly. This one may not be your cup of tea, but I like to keep a chromatic scale and a very clear sine wave so that I can, quickly tune something by ear if I need to. It helps. And sometimes I'll just keep some songs on here that I like to test headphones with.
How do you see it?
It's good, you know, to have a sort of miscellaneous folder with things you might often need to reference. But the metronome sounds are the most important. We'll get back to that in a bit. All right. Wow. We did it. We got through so much file organization and prep. It was a lot. By now, you should have like a whole bunch of samples sorted in your content folder. Drop them onto the SD card, and you should be able to peruse everything in a neat and tidy way.
Assuming you've been testing things along the way, you should have a pretty good idea of how everything looks and feels to navigate. But now is just a good time to go through everything and have a listen, see what instruments work, see if there's any subfolders you feel aren't where they're supposed to be, and just have a look at, see if things are organized the way you want. We're going to start to use these files quite soon, so it's the best time now to just go through and see everything's where you want it to be. If you find you've made a mistake, maybe you picked the wrong file type, or something's too long, or things aren't organized properly in your synths folder, it's better practice to go into your content folder and fix it there. Then replace the whole synth folder on the SD card with the synths from your content folder. The content folder is more or less your master sample library right now. If you make any changes to your SD card's import folder that aren't reflected in the content folder, you will get confused later if you create things or arrange things differently. So make the change here. Delete the folder on the SD card and replace it with the new folder. I can guarantee you, once you've started to work with the files on your SD card, you're going to have all sorts of ideas of things you want to add. So don't get rid of the work folder quite yet. If you're low on space, you can always scan for files that you think you can get rid of. You almost certainly have duplicates of files in your work folders, which you can go through and delete to save some space. But keep the construction project files because you're going to want to make more in the future. It's worth it to keep your SD card updated exactly the same as your content folder. So spend the extra 10 minutes waiting to transfer things instead of trying to update individual subfolders.
What are we going to do with these sounds? Where do we put them? Where do we start? Well, if you've used the SP404 before, you might have your own preference of arranging the banks and the samples, in those banks. Personally, I don't. I find myself trying a lot of different things to see kind of what sticks. There's no right or wrong way to lay out your pads on the SP404. There's no official best pad layout design, just a few common rules, right? Kick in the corner, and then a snare or a click or a clack, open, closed, hi-hats, and then everything else, in the top 3 rows is up for debate. Sometimes these are drum sounds and these are melodic, it's different every time. We need a strategy on where to drop the samples we've now meticulously collected. What works best will be up to you to decide. But I've got a few strategies here that I've been working on over the past year or so, and I actually tried about a dozen different songwriting strategies on the SP404. And the reason it took me so long to make this video is because I really needed to weed out the bad ideas, like the concepts that don't actually help. So have a look at the strategies that survived and see which one works the best with your own style of composing. I hope you find something here you like. The first compositional bank arrangement is something I've been calling Song Builder. It keeps all of the elements to building a beat on 2 banks, A and F in this case, which means you'll have 5 working songs per project, 8 rows of sounds, 32 sounds per project. The process of building a song would go something like this. You've got 4 drum sounds here, 4 percussion sounds here, 8 chords, maybe 4 of one sound and 4 of another, 4 instruments, 4 samples or catalysts, and 8 blank slots for looping, resampling, or, other things. Where you start and what order you do this in, it's totally up to you. Instead of building a kit right away, maybe your first move is to start by bringing in 4 chords and build a pattern around them.
I quite like that loop. As we add more layers, of course we duplicate our pattern so we can always go back to where we started, or if we do a bad recording, we can restart pretty easily. We have 4 drum sounds on row 4, 4 percussion sounds on row 3. We can just hammer out a little beat. nice little beat going. At this point, I've got a 4-bar loop with some nice chords and a beat to work with. Speaking for myself, not for everyone, this is where I would stop. A lot of the time. I've got a nice loop, which I can take with me anywhere. From now on, and anywhere I feel like playing, sitting down, playing over it with an acoustic instrument. For me, the songwriting process happens once the loop is done. Having a 4-bar loop going, playing an acoustic instrument, trying a couple different lyrics, this is where most of the work gets done for me. Again, that's me, not for everyone. All those sounds we've prepared, they don't have to go to waste. We can still develop the song on the 404 as much as we feel compelled to, as much as we're inspired to. There's still instruments here in the 4th row of F, which we can use to explore melodies if we don't play an acoustic instrument. And if we feel it's a bit too stale, we can play with the chops from our catalyst section, see if it sparks a new idea. I know what you're thinking. Getting pretty sick of the 4-bar loop by now, right? How does this actually become a song? Well, it's clear we already have an intro. The drums will come in and we've got our verse. I've been listening to the loop, I wrote some lyrics, I wrote a little zhongran part. We play over this part. Different patterns can be used for, just to try out different chord patterns, see if we want to do more. But we got a song. It's bare bones, and of course, it's probably not enough, I agree, but the idea has been sparked. The beat, melody, chords, all of that's been figured out. I've got the lyrics, I've got something I want to develop more. I'll keep this beat on my 404, and I have a loop I can try different lyrics with and stuff, but as for the rest of the process, it's time to move on to a DAW. We make a quick backup either on the 404 or using the software, and then we copy that to the backup folder on our computer. Now, getting from the 404 to the DAW can happen in a few different ways. We've already talked a bit about this in the chord breakdown, but let's revisit this again. If you happen to have put a lot more work into your beat than I just did, and you happen to like the way it sounds coming out of the 404 as is, you might as well just go through and record it now. Of course, you can record your performance effects while you're at it. I'm using Ableton, and it's currently set to EXT, which will follow the external MIDI. It'll sync with the SP404, so record, enable, and play. I believe we're in MIDI mode B, and we're only using one bank, so our MIDI data is a bit mixed together at the moment. But it's not too hard to separate. We'll get into how to do that in just a bit. But our audio is also all mixed together. We have our drums and our chords all in the same mix. We can make use of the pad mutes to record these separately. The pad mutes don't affect the MIDI, so I don't need to record MIDI again. I'm going to create a new audio track. Let's call it drums. On the 404, I'll enable pad mutes on the chords, which means we'll only hear the drums. We just record enable, and let's hear that back. Cool. I'll do the same thing, except mute the drums and only hear the chords. Record, enable, and go. That's a quick and easy way to isolate the different parts of our song and your different arrangement. But personally, I want to deconstruct this project a bit more. I use these chords and drum sounds to kind of get the beat going, but I would like the ability to eventually replace them. So I'm going to consider all of these audio to be demo recordings. I'm going to group these and call them demo. Let's have a look at this MIDI. We want to separate the drums from the chords. And you can see pretty clearly that up here, these are the chords and these are the drums. So I'm going to duplicate this. We'll take this, and I'm just going to get rid of all of these notes that represent the chords. Similarly, down here, I get rid of all the drums. Let's take this drum recording, and let's grab some samples. what I could do to get the original drum sounds is load up a sampler. If I go into the SP404 app, here's the project that's currently open. All of our drum samples are here. So I'm going to export these. And while I'm here, let's export the chords as well. Let's open this folder, and here's everything we just exported. Right now, this is inside of our 404 user folder, which we don't want to fill this up with samples all the time. We want to move these somewhere we know where they are. This is where the results folder comes into play. Our results folder is to be used however we want, but for right now, I'm going to use this as a sort of working place for all the things I've created in my 404. I'm going to create a new folder called, let's give it a name based on the lyrics I came up with, Nothing But Time. And let's give it a date, why not? We'll make a sample backups folder and drop everything in here. Now would also be a good time to save our Ableton project file to the same place. Nothing But Time. We now know where our drum samples are. Let's go into our sample backups folder. I want to take our drum sounds to recreate the drum pattern on Ableton. That's easy. Kick, snare, 13, 14, 15, 16, they go on the first row. 9, 10, 11, 12 on the second row. Now, if I were to just listen to this track, let's hear. Great, it's the same samples, except it's not the same BPM. The original song was 90 BPM. So now if I listen back, there it is. Let's hear it against the original recording. Well, would you look at that? We did it. The chords are a little trickier. Of course, I could bring in a drum rack and do the same thing. Let's play this back and see what happens. We just use those 4 chords in the top. That's easy. So we bring in our chord samples into the top row. Let's see if we can get them to play back. Yep, it's the same. We'd have to adjust the release to make it sound a little bit more similar to the original, but we have the chords we need. However, I want to replace these with MIDI. Now, I've heard in Ableton 12, you can actually put MIDI chords into the drum rack and be able to trigger chords using the drum rack. That would be great. But unfortunately, we can't do that in Ableton 11. I want to use these 4 notes and create the MIDI chords from that. That shouldn't be too hard. I could go into the Chord Construction project and grab the original chords. Oh, actually, yeah, let's do that. That's a way better idea than I was thinking before. We go to our work folder, going into the chords. We have our Chord Sets project. And let's open this up. Okay, I haven't seen this project in quite a while. It's been several months. So it would be really great to be able to drag this straight into our other project, but it seems we can't do that in Ableton 11 either. So what I'm going to do is export each one of these 15 chords to a MIDI clip. Stay organized. I'll put this into the chord folder, and I'll create a new folder called Chord Set 01 MIDI clips. And, oh, perfect, it's named the way we want it to. So we save that as a MIDI clip, and we do this again 15 times. It's a little bit faster if you use Control-Shift-E and just give everything an export. Now we can close this project. We don't need it anymore. I've added the library 1 to my Ableton pool over here, which is quite nice. Now I can just go into chords. There we go. There's our MIDI clips. Looking at the drum rack, we go from a B major 9. We'll just drop this onto a new MIDI track here. Should just be able to drag. There we go. Our second chord looks like an E9 sus4. Bring that in. I use some pretty crazy chords. I'd probably suggest keeping it simple. Third song is a D minor 7. And fourth is A minor 7. Now let's just throw in a quick MIDI synth and let's hear how it sounds. Not bad. There we go. Now the reason this one sounds a little bit better is that there's a little bit more control over the release, and you can hear just a little bit of flair, but we have our chord set right here, which means we can refine this. We can consolidate it. There's our chord progression. We can go in here and add a little bit of humanizing. Now we can replace it with a much better sounding instrument. Let's go for like a nice Stage 73. We can add a couple of effects, a nice little tape echo, a tape mellow-fi. If we bring our velocity down, oh, that's smooth. Let's try it with the original drums. Just as easily, we can swap out the drum sounds. We've got our drum rack here. But the original drums I picked maybe weren't the best. These are just the original sounds. We can go into our content folder, which is now inside of Ableton. Isn't that great? And let's pick, Wu-Tang, of course. It's for the kids. Add a new kick, add some sounds. That's big progress. I like that a lot more. Of course, I could go in and, if it was me, I'd probably just redo the drums and keep working from here, but the idea has been captured. I've essentially taken the 404 project and moved it back into a DAW. This process is a lot less, let's say, inspired than you might find messing around on the 404, but the results are going to be cleaner and they're easier to work with. The 404 has done its job, and from here I'm going to go in and clean these drums up, maybe redo them, replace the sounds even farther, probably just play this out on a piano and just keep adjusting the notes, maybe add some flares, maybe add some different chords, and just keep working from here. I've got my lyrics, which I wrote thanks to having my 404 so accessible. I've got my instrumental ideas, which I can now track in my quiet room as opposed to being outside. Not to mention, I'll probably start arranging. We have our intro here, add a verse, moving into the beat, start to track out the audio down here, and just, you can see it's far more optimal for arranging. Now this point comes pretty early in the process for me. You may think, well, hang on, maybe I should use the SP404 to finish the damn song. I've come this far, right? You may feel this way, and if this were your song, you may want to continue exploring ideas on the 404 and write it out for, could be more hours. But in my personal workflow, the 404 has finished its job. I've found something great, I like that song a lot, by using the 404, and I've decided what sounds to use, I've got my lyrics, I've got my little phrases on the instrument. I now want to switch to a nonlinear workflow. The 404 is still there for me if I want to sit away from my computer and just practice or try to find new patterns or just, practice my instrument or singing. Great. I can still record loops of new ideas and import them anytime. But be reasonable with yourself. Don't challenge yourself to use the 404 for more than you need to do. It's a tool. It's not a commitment you have to stick to because you paid for it. At some point in this idea phase, the song stops being an idea. It becomes a song. To progress, you'll want to shift over to a better workflow, something nonlinear. Don't use the 404 for more of the process than you need to if it slows you down. This video is about getting songs written. My song is written, it's time to record it. So this song builder method, it's not bad. The pros are that when you only give yourself a few slots of each type of sound, then you're taking advantage of your creative limitations. You're likely to spend less time hunting down the right sounds and more time creating. It sort of forces you to focus, to use what you've got, and to make clear decisions about what part you're working on in that moment. That's what the SP404 is all about, right? Not to mention, it's less real estate in the 404. You can dedicate a project to rough ideas, assembling, the song builder method, and have 5 idea slots tucked away in one project. That's great. Obviously, it has its drawbacks. Selecting sounds via the import window is a bit tedious, especially when chords are a bit of a crapshoot. And, limiting the number of pads we have to 4 chords may be a bit too limiting for your songwriting method. So let's try something with a bit more flexibility.
Roland's demo projects on the SP404, I'm sure you've heard them by now. They're honestly great. But the thing is, they're very pre-composed. They don't really offer a good solution for writing songs on the SP404. They were clearly made in a DAW and then imported, and they're played back in a very, very creative way, but that requires so much pre-composition, and it's not really viable for what we're going for. This method is the opposite of that. The bank-oriented method is a far cry from Roland's demo projects in that we're going to use one bank for each sort of sound. Your own method may vary, but let's assume this. We'll be placing 2 complete 16-pad drum kits in banks A and F, 2 sets of 15 chords, plus that single note, don't forget, on banks B and G. Bank C has 16 different bass timbres, each a single note in the key of C. Now, we're not using 16 different timbres of bass for a single song. Think about this more as like a mini instrument library. And the same goes for Bank H. Each is a pad, right? You can use either pads or soundscapes, or this could also be where you put your catalysts. Bank D, 16 different key sounds. Bank I, 16 different lead sounds. Banks E and J, I would keep them blank or add your catalysts in here as you work on your song. Or you'll probably end up wanting to resample stuff. Remember, blanks are super important. Blanks are a critical part of composing on the SP404. Do not fill every slot of a project with sound. You're going to need them for sampling, resampling, field recording, voice memos, anything. This method of arranging sounds is great. It is optimized for what we're doing. We have a whole drum kit here we can start finger drumming or sequencing with to, start a track. We can build complicated chord sequences by combining the different chords. Little melodies, we can quickly swap between 16 different textures to see which one sounds best. But 16 is still limited enough to keep you focused, rather than, preset surfing through your whole library. Now check this out, bank mutes now serve as part mutes, so you can really quickly mute your drums. Swapping drum kits, super easy, right? You could use one drum kit to build out a whole sequence and then just really quickly import a whole new drum kit to see how it sounds now. Another major benefit to using banks for similar types of sounds is envelope control.
By holding Remain, we can adjust the envelope for all the sounds within a bank. We can also do this with the gate and the loop functions. Another added benefit to having the sounds within a single bank means we can adjust the pitch of all the notes, just in case we want to change our root note.
That's great, that's super convenient. So you think about your bank-oriented arrangement as a small preset library, within which you can compose a few different songs, or a few different ideas. Saving patterns to each bank means you could still sort your work in this project into 10 different songs. And actually, building this kit, it's really not too hard, right?
We start off by taking our pre-made drum kits and we import them to banks A and F. If you did everything right, they should import to the right order. Then, we build banks B and G by importing the chord sets, each of which should have 15 chords and the one blank note. In this demo, I'm using 2 sets of 16, but of course you could have one instrument with 32 different chords. We're filling bank C with bass samples, all in the key of C, of course. In this instance, it doesn't matter whether they sound good together or not. Actually, we're aiming for diversity, so you fill this with just a bunch of different bass sounds. For bank H, we fill it with a set of pads, or whatever you want at this point. You can put some tender loving care to make sure all your sounds are different, but in this case, I'm just going to grab everything I made in the Arcus VST. Now this bank can be played back chromatically, although go easy because these sounds are really complex. Bank D is full of our instrument sounds, In this one, you ought to spend some time curating a nice set of sounds that work together. On mine, I consider this the keyboard section, so good piano sounds is always a good recommendation. And now that all the instruments are inside of one bank, we can hold remain and adjust the envelopes of every sound at the same time. When played in polyphonic chromatic mode, we essentially have a series of piano instruments available to us. Building bank I, full of our lead sounds, works the same way in that you can go through and pick a selection of sounds that ideally sound well together. However, it may not really be clear what that is until later, so for now just import things that you want to play with, and eventually you can fine-tune your selection later. How you distinguish banks D from I is up to you, but having these sounds be a bit more clear and pronounced, that's a good differentiation. A bank E is reserved for samples or your catalysts. How you choose to decide what samples are going to be loaded into a template is up to you. In this case, I'm going to import a single sound and spread 16 chops across the 16 samples.
This is a song that I wrote when I was back in Texas, Mr. Garib.
Now, this is where you and I differ. It is entirely up to you what you plan to do with Bank E, but just know that it's reserved for chopping and sampling and things that don't necessarily fit into those other categories of drum and chromatic playback. You may very well choose to keep this bank empty so that when you're in the moment and you've already created, say, a bass line and a drum pattern, you may have an idea of what you want to fill this bank with. Or you may want to leave it for collecting sounds out in the world. So feel free to keep this blank or preload it with something you'd like to use.
Now, that seems like a lot of work to do every time you want to start a new song, though, right? We should make a template. All this importing, envelope adjustment, sound choice, and all that, it'd be nice to do this once and then be able to load it up again on different projects. Now, I only recommend making a template project file once you've become really familiar with the sounds in it, because that way you don't have to redo it a lot if you, constantly change your mind. But once you've got a collection of sounds from your library that you feel work well together, we can add one or two little things to make our lives easier and then save this as an optional starting point for future projects. For example, let's put a metronome sequence on every bank. That way we always have a metronome in case we want it.
So we begin by importing two metronome sounds, a bass and a clap, to bank J in the bottom right corner. And then we just start a simple one-bar sequence where we put the kick on the 1 and the click on the 2, 3, 4. I like to make the velocity go down over the course of those 3 notes. That way we can sort of hear a progression of the beat. Now, in the bottom right corner, we always have a pattern that is a metronome. If we don't use it, we can delete it. But very important, these 2 notes should be set to pad mute. That way we only hear them in the headphones as opposed to our main mix. That means the metronome sound will never appear in a resample or in the looper.
Pro tip. And now we always have a metronome to work with in case we want to start our project with that. That's just one idea. If there's a certain kind of sequence you like to start a song with, let's say you always start with the 4 to the floor, like a kick drum pattern, why not throw it into your template? You can always just delete it if you don't use it. It's easy. It would also be nice to set every bank to your most commonly used BPM, just a nice way to get started.
It's never not funny.
Once you've got any template sequences and stuff you may want, you're certain everything is gated and looped the way you want it, everything has an envelope, and just generally you've created something that feels like a good starting point, export that project to your SD card.
Exporting a project as a template is very, very simple. However, should you choose to rename the project on the device, as I'm doing here, you'll find that it takes a very long time. Just export it without a name and rename it on a computer when you have a keyboard. And guess where that template file is going to be saved on a computer? That's right.
The square hole.
The backups folder. We can keep the projects that we're in the middle of working on in here, but this is also a really great place to keep any template files that you might make, just in case you ever want to reload them again in the future.
Now you always have a good project you can load up anytime you just want to get started. So now, instead of starting on an absolutely blank project, you can get right into your flow with your favorite presets, some quick start sequences, anything. You can build different templates for different genres, or you can just skip the whole thing entirely. It doesn't matter. The point is to get to the songwriting part as quickly as you can when you're most inspired to do so. And if you're messing around with the template and that costs you like a lot of time and you just feel like you'd rather just be importing the sounds, forget it. just get a sound going and get to writing. So personally, I've been workshopping the bank-oriented template for a year now, and this is what I've come up with. I found it really works great for me. It's my favorite way to arrange the banks and such. I would be super curious to see your own take on this and what it looks like. But for now, let's consider some other methods that might be of interest to you. So what if we want to work a little bit faster, a little bit more like naturally, more flow? And especially, what if you don't like the pattern sequencer, which a lot of people don't? There's another method which can help you catch ideas a bit more quickly. But first, a relevant anecdote. Let me be frank about how I make music with acoustic instruments. Years ago, I was a classically trained trombonist. I used to read music, I used to compose notation, I used to be able to play the exact thing again and again and again by memory. Classical training will do that to you. I have since lost that skill. I feel like every time I play something, it's just a little bit different every time. And I've sort of not been able to recreate things sometimes. This is the direct result of lack of practice, lack of focus. It's a fascination with just so many different devices and sounds and instruments, and like it infuriates the classic musicians that I play with. But generally, this is me. This is how I make music. I don't compose as much as I improvise and freestyle and then just desperately try to catch the idea in the hope that somehow I'll remember how to play it and to be able to play it again if I find something special. It's a curse more so than a blessing, but I still get gigs, I still play, so it's working for me for now. The SP404 has always been my go-to playback machine, a very loyal partner on stage, but as far as composition goes, honestly, I found the 505 to be more aligned with the way I make music. I would sit and play zither or, whatever instrument, trying new ideas, playing for a long time, and then when I find something I like, I quickly catch a loop. Then I would mimic the loop a few times to make sure I could play it again, and then play on top of it. Or maybe switch instruments and build a song kind of based on these layers. Still, the 404 is much smaller, it's battery powered, and something I'm way more willing to carry with me, or even just put on my desk. So we can recreate this particular style of songwriting using the looper.
The SP404's looper may not be as comprehensive as that of a dedicated loop station, but there is a trick to using it in a good way. I'll explain how to build it, but here's the gist. We create a pattern where all the pads play on the downbeat. Then, as the pattern plays, we record to the looper via either the external in or the mix. We save that loop to one of the pads. That way, it'll automatically replay when the pattern resets. To continue recording from the mix without capturing the sound of the previous loops, we can just pad mute it, remove it from the mix audio, allowing us to build multiple layers of audio. We can start from scratch here, but I'm going to start with one of those metronome patterns that I've already created and duplicate it to 4 measures. In bank E, I just have some quiet, empty, blank pads. I'm going to trigger all of these using the TR rec mode on the downbeat. Subpad, select pad, put it on pad 1, do the same with 2 and 3 and 4, etc. You'll see on the downbeat, all 16 pads are triggered at once. Well, they don't all trigger at the same time due to the voice limitation. If these were all mono, then we'd be able to trigger them all without an issue, I think. Let's start by mixing an external in. I'll start the looper right on the downbeat. We're looping the external input. I'm not playing anything, so it's just overdubbing silence, which is perfect. The looper won't stop recording until I turn off overdub mode. This loop is good. I'm going to copy it to one of our pads. Let's see what happens when the pattern resets. It doesn't play through the loop because it's gated. We just turn that off. And now it's playing through. If I turn off the loop, the sound is still going. That makes it very easy to start the looper again and just add on top. Now I can just play to my heart's content. Perfect. That's smooth. We turn off the loop, we copy it to here, turn off the gate, and there we go. Real quick and easy with it. So what if I want to do this with the mix? Let's just see what happens if I record a loop. 3, 4. It's recording these 2 loops, which I do not want. There's a way around that. We only want to sample the mix, not these 2 pads, so all we have to do is use pad mute. We could just pad mute all of these loop slots. And that way, when we use the looper, it's only going to loop what I play. It's not recording anything that's been pad muted. It's not recording the metronome, it's not recording the pads. So now I can just take, say, a drum set and just loop on top. Right? Put that over here. You'll hear it double back on itself, but that's just going to stop as soon as the pattern resets. Now, I'm not sure how that one managed to stay gated, but it worked out. If I were to loop again, it's muted. It works. It's still silent. That's how you do your looping. We just head over here, we overdub, and we can just add as many layers as we want. The key is just to make sure all your previous loops are pad muted. That's not a great loop, but we just copy that to number 4. Make sure we turn off the gate. Now we have all 4 loops just going. You can fill a whole bank just like that.
So far, this is the fastest way I found to workshop different drum beats, right? Just record in live time to the looper. Hear it back. If you don't like it, delete it and do it again. When it's finished, you save it to a pad. The looper is honestly my favorite way to capture the natural flow of ideas. It sort of bypasses the whole complex workflow of the SP404 that rubs a lot of people in the wrong way, and it's just straight to the point. Recording a few bars, it asks you if you want to save it or redo it. This is, well, looping is not for everyone, but to me, this actually makes the most sense. Now, if you've ever tried to build a whole song using loops, it's pretty hard to switch between different parts of the song, chord changes between verse and chorus, and then this process shows its weakness here. Simply looping every pad will make it harder to trigger certain loops at certain times. You could always make use of the pad mutes here, or even sample volume, but now we're getting into compromises, and we're trying not to do that. You could keep different loops triggered on different patterns, loops 1 through 8 triggered on the downbeat of pattern 1, 9 through 16 on the downbeat of pattern 2. But this is something, now we're getting into really strong personal preference, and this is something you would have to explore and workshop and try. This instant looping method has a lot of shortcomings. If you've ever used a looper before, you know that you're gonna hear the loop point every time. It will be BPM synced, which is, very nice, but it's not ideal. The recordings you make in the looper aren't going to be ideal, and they could very likely be unusable when you get to a DAW. Your stems might just be too looped for them to be of use to you. Still, I found this to be the fastest idea capturing system, at least in my experience. But we've been working towards speed and optimization and faster. What if that's not the right way to go? What if we want to go the opposite way and slow down a little? The 4-track cassette machine was the corner of the bedroom studio in the 80s and 90s. It is a unforgivably linear recording system, with enough limitations to make you wonder if being a musician is worth the headache. A linear editing system means you're gonna work in a straight line. You wanna go back to the start of like a sequence? You need to rewind. Jump ahead? Hopefully you remember where. You wanna change your BPM or your key? Oops, sucks, start over. This sort of device makes the SP404 Mark II look as flexible as a DAW. But musicians worked with these limitations for decades. Have you ever tried to record through a whole song without working with MIDI? Have you ever tried committing hours to practicing and improvising your performance for a 3-minute playthrough? If you've only ever worked in a nonlinear editing system, if you've never worked like without a DAW, it might be worth trying something new. So what would happen if we treated the SP404 as a 4-track recorder?
In this section, we're going to be attempting to use the 404 to record the audio and the MIDI output of instruments intended for long-form recording. If you're recording external sounds, then the process is very simple. We record the audio to an empty pad, probably in Bank J, and if it's a synthesizer, we record the MIDI input using a cleverly arranged array of blank pads, filled but with silence. If you want to do long-form recording with internal sounds, you may want to consider just using the pattern sequencer, otherwise we just record and resample the sounds as we play them. And then we make use of mutes on previous recordings, and continue to record on top while listening to our previous recordings. The objective is to be able to capture the audio and MIDI of a long recording session, maybe 10 minutes of just playing, toying around, and eventually going in and finding a small segment of that recording, of that improvisation, exploration that we want to make use of in the future. Having a look at the MIDI implementation chart, in MIDI mode B, you can see the incoming notes are recorded to individual pads. We can't record the MIDI from the chromatic mode, but we can record incoming data from a MIDI keyboard or synthesizer. MIDI channel 1 is recorded to banks A through E, with a range of C0 to G6, whereas MIDI channel 2 is recorded to the other 5 banks with the same range. This means we could record 2 MIDI instruments with a range of 6 octaves each. One's recorded to banks A through E, and the other's recorded to F and J. Of course, if you want to be economic about it, we could split that up. You could have one instrument record to 2 octaves, one to 1 octave, and you could just have a variety of different MIDI going all at the same time on one device. Needless to say, if you're not recording a synthesizer, if you're just recording audio, then this process gets a lot simpler. You just record your external sound or your internal mix, and then have it playing in the background, pad muted, while just recording the next layer, and just add layers one at a time. The first thing we need to do to be able to record MIDI from an external instrument is to fill our banks with silent recordings. The easiest way to do this is just record silence for, 5-10 seconds, and then use Sample Chop to just fill the pads with just blank, silent pads. We need to fill maybe 9 out of the 10 banks with just silent pads. With my MIDI synthesizer set to channel 1, you can see it triggering the notes on the banks. Those notes are, again, just silent pads, but that silence is important because it means in the pattern sequencer mode, that information will be recorded. Let's try. Now, if I send the MIDI data from the SP404 back into the Gaia, playing the pattern will play the synthesizer as I played it the first time. This means the MIDI data was successfully recorded. What I can do now is open up that pattern and resample the external audio source. The pattern is sending MIDI data to the synthesizer, and it's recording the audio that it's hearing back. We have successfully recorded the audio from that performance, as well as the MIDI data. These can both be exported to a DAW, or we could add more layers from here, stack up a multi-track recording.
The hard work is instantly offloaded from the SP404 and put onto your shoulders. But you may be better at bearing this weight than you think. In that sense, the SP404 kind of becomes like an audio MIDI recorder, which, depending on your circumstance, if you're a keyboard player, this might be super interesting to you. This method is looted. It's sort of going backwards, you know, and it is a definite far cry from the intended use of the SP404. But sometimes, being in a place of inspiration, you want to focus on capturing the spirit of your performance. Pressing record and doing nothing else is probably the second most liberating way to compose music. The first being to play without recording at all. To sit there, compose a song, commit it to memory, and think of nothing but how you feel when singing it and playing it, and how those around you will hear it and how they'll feel when you play it for them directly. If you've never played music like this before, it's worth a shot. This has been an exercise in versatility. Choosing the limitations you want to impose on yourself while you create. The SP404 is simultaneously the most versatile tool you can ask for and a box of headache and limitations. It's up to you how you want to perceive it. Unless the past few minutes of information have somehow completely changed your opinion of the SP404 workflow, then please approach new workflows with caution. They will take a considerable amount of time to attempt and learn and mess up, workshop again and again and again. There's a lot of things happening under the hood of the SP404, and when you find that, you know, the looper doesn't always stick to the BPM you set, or you accidentally sampled the wrong bank, or this kind of stuff can really get in the way of your creative process. So I encourage you to consider these different workflows, see which one interests you the most, check the manual for any functions you're not clear about, and then don't commit an inordinate amount of time to anything I've mentioned before you try it, a small part of it. Don't build 100 drum kits in one go, because you may realize that, you know, maybe you actually do prefer the snare in the second row and you would have to do them all again, or, you know, you find that you don't look at the file names often enough to justify naming everything properly. Or worst of all, you spend a few hours learning like the looper and you build some great looping system before you realize maybe you shouldn't be using the 404 for this at all. Maybe you should get a 505. Maybe it's better at every single thing you're trying to do. The SP404, like life itself, is a series of compromises. By no means should you seek to master every function of the SP404. That is a waste of your time. You should seek to find a method that works for you, to help you compose and create, and then stick to it. Spend your non-creative time preparing your samples and your sounds. Then take that precious, inspired time that you have when you sit down and you're willing to do something with it. Grasp it. Cherish it. Don't let it go. In this day and age, inspiration is a fleeting resource, as is time and creativity. Catch what you can when you can. Do your best to love every minute of it, especially the hard parts. I've done what I can to help. There's one last thing I can do. I've made every sound in this video that I have permission to use available for download. I've built these templates, I've sampled everything, organized, I've arranged it all for you if you choose to buy the pack. I've modified all the synth sounds and I've sampled them so that they're yours to use. I've included some drum sounds that I've made and modified. I've made a list of sounds that you can find online for free that I can't personally redistribute. And I've listed some, some VSTs, some free ones that you can download. I've made documents on how to resample your drum synths and libraries. I've also made this video available for download. I did my best to, cut it up in a way that is easier to reference in case you want to use this video in the future and use it as a thing to study. As of now, buying this pack is sort of the only way you can support me and my channel. Unfortunately, I can't commit to a Patreon. I don't accept tips. Next year, I'm hoping to build some hardware which you can buy and use, but until then, like, subscribe, share with someone who needs it. If you found a technique for preparing samples or arranging banks in a way that's more optimized than what I've shown here, or if there's anything I've done and you have a better idea, please share it with us in the comments. We're a community here. I'm sorry I don't make videos as often as I should. As you can imagine, you know, it's a lot of work. My view count on YouTube is pretty low, but they've reached the right people. These videos have been seen in the industry. I now work directly with Roland and a number of synthesizer brands. I've built a career as a musician wholeheartedly, and I count my blessings for that every day. These SP404 tutorials are a labor of love for a device that has truly changed my life, and for a community of people who have accepted me as one of their own. I've since built a career around this thing, but I have all of you to thank. So, I'm Ukes, now in Shanghai, China, in my little Shanghai home. Join the Discord. Let's chat about anything you learned today. Thank you for watching.